Hello, everyone. Welcome to Holding Space, episode 5. It feels like Star Wars, episode 5. And here we are today with some wonderful guests and a guest host because Reverend Avi Genamanchi is on his sabbatical. But we are honored to have as a guest host Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd. Could you please introduce yourself and tell them where you're from?
People usually don't like to come to class when there's a substitute teacher, especially when the instructor is amazing, like Abi Janamachi. But I am Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd, your substitute guest co-host today. I serve as Director of Communications and Public Ministry at our UUA, a role that is evolving while I serve within it. And I'm grateful to be with you all. And we're all
Evolving even while you're here
Yes, at this moment, it is
at this
becoming
moment.
something new. And I know that you and I, David, have learned a lot and laughed a lot and been inspired to be more strategic in any number of ways by our guest, Jake. And it's so great to have you here.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm Jake Morrill. I'm here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, near Knoxville. I'm a UU minister, and as I was discussing a moment ago, before we started taping, happily serving the Foothills UU Fellowship in Maryville, Tennessee. And I also am a coach and consultant with businesses and congregations and various other folks. So that's probably enough. That's me.
Well, you're also modest. You're modest because you're uh, thought to be amongst our UU group, family systems expert. Why don't you actually describe a little bit what that means and where that comes from?
So my colleague Amy Post gave this a description on a podcast that I listened to a couple of days ago. So I'm stealing it brazenly from her. She talked about how in the movie El Canto, which I only make it through about 10 minutes of a movie before I fall asleep. So, but what she says about El Canto is that there's this family where everybody, like, how the family goes. You know what happens for everybody who's in this family. We all do what we do. We all receive the gift. And then things shift a little bit. And then there comes this generation where there's Mirabelle Madrigal, who's a little different, who's a little, you know, and figuring out what happens in the threat of a shifted environment and the threat of somebody being different and also in relationship is kind of what Bowen theory looks at. Um, in families, we just had Thanksgiving last week. Our family, all 25 people who show up at my mother's cabin, know exactly what's expected of them. And all of us have some choices about how we're going to relate to those expectations. Same in congregations. The script is written, we arrive on stage and figure out how to handle ourselves. So that's an intro.
I love that the whole intro is by way of Encanto. David, I don't know if you must have seen Encanto. If you haven't, you should. And the most famous song, like the earworm song from that film, is Lin-Manuel Miranda's great "We Don't Talk About Bruno," which I will not sing for you, but it's fantastic, right? And it's this whole thing where there's an entire character in the family system that literally everyone cannot see, cannot acknowledge the presence, and yet this character looms so large in their relationships to each other, in their dynamics, in their dysfunction,
Yeah.
that he is more present than if he were sitting right next to you at the Thanksgiving table. And I know that in family systems theory, much of the work is both to acknowledge when we are on script and where the origin points of those scripts are,
Mhm.
and when we can, with trust and boundaries and appropriate contexts, finally talk about Bruno, like actually talk about the story behind the story that we expend most of our emotional energy to avoid.
Yeah, yeah. I I sometimes say that differentiation is a two-step, and so differentiation is a $5 word for being mature, being flexible, being free in relationship. And that I call it a two-step. I say it's first reading the room, see the landscape, and then second, responding thoughtfully in a choiceful way. And part of that reading the room is, like you say, Nancy, being able to see and name what's really going on, not just what's the norms for how we talk about and how we agree to overlook certain things. So yeah, that's right on.
Yeah, I am so glad that you two have admitted that there are issues with families, especially at Thanksgiving, because mine had none ever. We were perfect in our relations with one.
And so is every congregation that all of us
Yes,
ever served.
every that's
We are
right.
always only having one conversation, not three levels of conversation at once, most of which we don't want to admit, right? Yeah.
Jake, one of the things that I've talked about through the years is that congregations seem to have a DNA, right? There's a structure that was started at some point in time and lives on in some ways. And there's an equilibrium and a disequilibrium that happens when the DNA is varied from. How does that fit with kind of what you're talking about?
One of the things I like about Bowen theory, here I'm going into like sales mode. One of
That's
the
all right. Go ahead.
benefits that you'll get if you take home this fancy, crazy theory uh, is, in my view, it's no sinners, no saints. We're all in the mess. We're all a piece of work. We're all work in progress. And
Amen.
and so the idea of pathologizing individuals or pathologizing congregations or families for me is just out of the question, or it's unproductive. Um, what I see in families and congregations is that different ones each has figured out a survival system collectively, how to manage the electricity of threat response, of anxiety. And so different congregations have experienced different threats and have been joined by leaders and ministers who have different strategies that they bring from their families. So some of those are, we don't talk about Bruno, that becomes, how we survive and keep sustaining is by avoidance. Uh, you know, there's a congregation I've been tracking for almost 20 years. They like to be at 70 members, but they're so darn good at it that about every 5 years they grow to 120, and then they have a fight and they go back down again. I see that, and each new minister who celebrates the growth and then gets spit out, this, wonders what the heck happened. But I see it somehow there is equilibrium is a self-protective survival strategy. I guess I just want to say that we can call it dysfunctional or messed up or whatever, but its intentions are good. And the intentions of anxiety get such a bad rap. Evolutionarily, the intentions of anxiety are good. It's to mobilize our resources to protect against threat. It's just we get stuck in that gear and can't toggle down when we're not under threat.
This is a bit of a leap, but I'm going to make it anyway. There's something profoundly universalist about that, in fact. Um, as applied to congregations and communities. So instead of relating to a congregational system in this like clearly diagnostic sort of dualistic way, like, well, this is a toxic system and this is a healthy system, and either judging on one side or back patting. And sometimes we clergy will back pat ourselves, like, look at how much I as a person have built health into this system, right? Instead of doing that, what you're articulating is this deep curiosity and in some ways foundational blessing to the endeavor of resilience in systems, and that
Yeah.
systems like are trying to survive, and they're going to do that in a number of different ways, And if we can figure out how to pick that apart instead of just judge it, maybe there's hope for those systems. Anyway, I think you're quite the universalist pastor there, Jake.
Hey, I took vows along those lines.
Ah,
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, so as a child growing up, it was useful for me and my family for me to be publicly charming while withholding painful stuff. I got very good at that. And no wonder I came back to Tennessee to serve a church in the secret city where status is conferred upon people with higher security clearances, the ability to keep secrets. Like, secret keeping can be very useful. It helped me get out of childhood. And it doesn't work so well as an adult. And so I think with congregations or people in them, just because that's what the trick I learned 20 years ago or 40 years ago was, doesn't mean, that transformation can't mean taking the risk of unlearning or of learning some new dance moves.
Jake, all this actually makes me think about the anxiety that we are traveling through in the world at the moment, and how congregations and which are made up of individuals, right, are dealing with that anxiety. And part of the mechanisms of which you speak sound like coping mechanisms, right? How do we cope with all this? What are you seeing as I'm I'd like you to give us in 3 words the answer to how we're all feeling. No, I'm just kidding. Um, what do you see as sort of the issues around what's happening now with what's going on in the world, how people are trying to cope with it, and what that means for systems that are can be highly anxious?
Well, I've told this story in a few places before, but I have an epilogue. So in between March and April of 2020, the onset of COVID, I started hearing the same story over and over again. So I started counting 17 different clergy clients that I was talking to, 17 in those weeks, told the story of serving a usually anti-authoritarian congregation, which all of a sudden wanted them to unilaterally make huge sweeping decisions about staying open or closed or this or that. They were saying, I don't know. I'm not a public health expert. And furthermore, I don't think that's my decision, but they were being pressed upon. I mean, it was a story after over and over again. So this impulse under threat in the face of ambiguity and uncertainty to look for a strong man, to look for concentrated power, just like if there's fire in the theater, that's not time for a philosophical debate. Somebody who says, there's the door, run. So, and then the second part of that story, before my epilogue this fall, the second part of that story is in June. I didn't keep count, but many of the same people were telling the story of backlash. Now they're angry at me. They're calling me tyrant because they wanted me to make decisions back in March, and now I'm getting punished for it. So, I think that's some of what anxiety does. If anxiety looks like fight or flight in the individual, in systems or collectives, it looks like concentrating power and concentrating perspective, groupthink. I mean, mammals do it with herding, gather together. So the epilogue this fall, for some reason, I am having a lot of the same conversations where somebody who usefully overfunctioned during COVID and crisis has now become a problem in 2023, 24, where they're stuck in that gear of Mighty Mouse save the day overfunctioning, and that's ticking other people off. And it's confusing for them because they were rewarded for knowing how Zoom works, knowing how this setting up the potlucks, doing all the stuff. But now that congregations have sort of, I would say, settled into some new normal or adapted to the ongoing crisis, there's this reversion to more distributed intelligence, more people's opinions, more distributed decision making, more like,
But isn't that also a response to the authoritarian perceptions that are happening externally? Is that,
what do you mean?
well, I mean, the perception that there's an authoritarian, not a perception, but across the world, that there's an authoritarian impulse that's threatening democracy is something that has been brought forth and that people in our congregations, many of our congregations, are reacting to.
I think it's a great, I see it as a great challenge. If at the beginning of COVID, the snapshot report card was that our people are no different than other humans in wanting a unilateral power monger when under threat, what does it take for us to uphold practices of collective discernment and decision making? What does it take for us to keep listening and stay in that emergent, relatively thoughtful mode, even in the face of the world on fire? It would be so tempting to resolve things with, a mimic or an echo of authoritarianism. So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious what you all see, how you see Unitarian Universalism responding or congregations responding in this light.
I think there are several threads of this that I'm sort of living in right now. And also your story, just like count your 17 as 18, because I was in parish ministry when COVID hit and experienced exactly that need, especially from the staff team, to be decisive and be clear. And in fact, we gave that alter ego, that version of me, a nickname. We called her Business Nancy. And
Okay.
the staff team would directly say, they'd look at me and say, we need Business Nancy now to make this decision so that we can move forward. And the saving grace of that was that I was deputized. I was like called in to that task
Yeah.
without necessarily assuming that Business Nancy and Nancy are the same exact thing. Like, here's a function that the system needs of me, but is that actually fully an expression of who I am as a leader? And that was a fascinating dance. Um, and I could, an epilogue to that service is that I think I did not successfully learn through the services of a coach such as yourself how to extract myself from the overfunctioning that came with Business Nancy. And the critique, like nipping from the outside didn't come, but the exhaustion came. And I know
Sure.
you're working with colleagues across the board to help manage that. And one of the things that strikes me, David, I wonder if the sort of flattening of system, the flattening of leadership expectations and systems is not so much a reaction to demagoguery on the national or international political scale, um, but a symptom of the further erosion of trust in institutions and authority within those institutions as a whole. I worry a lot about waning trust in institutions in our society, um, especially on the left. And I think it impacts our congregations. Certainly, it impacts denominational structures, um, and it impacts political parties. And in some ways, people on the right are more inclined to trust the institutions and structures of their ideological base than people on the left that are like, burn it down. It's not working. Burn it down. And I'm not saying that our congregations are in a it's not working, burn it down place, but they are in a why should we do things in formal, institutional, structured, hierarchical ways? Maybe we could flatten the hierarchy a little. Anyway, that was a whole soapbox.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess my question is, in overall anxious times, does it make people, in your experience, Jake, distrust institutions and systems more? Or does it make people just revert to familiar institutions and systems more? Oh no, I stumped him.
Well, I'm just thinking So I see anxiety as a response to a pre-existing dynamic, which may be rapid change or, unanticipated complexity. And so I'm just thinking about that. I guess I think can see it go either way toward, so a systems concept is fusion or cutoff. Fusion is we think exactly the same, we see exactly the same. Cutoff is I can't even breathe the same air, I can't even deal with that person, and those are two sides of the same coin, fusion and cutoff. So they're both sort of absolutist knee-jerk ways of dealing with anxiety by resolving it through total agreement or total estrangement. And I guess I can see the same with the relationship to institutions. It's sort of tell me what to do, Father, or none of them are any good. And I guess I think for me, thoughtfulness always is much less dramatic, or maturity is always much less dramatic. It's like, yeah, there's probably some things to reform here to the extent that these are solutions and structures from a prior age and we're facing new challenges. So I don't know. I mean, part of what I'm thinking, I have the odd experience this fall, as well as working with this small UU congregation. I'm consulting with a conservative evangelical congregation where, from what I can tell, most of the folks voted for Trump. And I think the attitude about institutions is pretty similar. I mean, there are differences, but I don't know. So I think that's just what I'm thinking, but I don't know if that's productive for this podcast where 5-minute silences are not useful.
I think it is because it complicates the story. I think part of and in systems theory, we're often talking about like what's the story you're telling yourself. And I think part of the story I'm telling myself as a person who works mostly in systems that would identify themselves ideologically on the left is over there on the right, they're actually doing it better and we're messing it up, right? Not that ideologically the systems and institutions on the right are somehow not falling apart and ours are. And what that is, that's my anxiety and how that manifests. So I will stop my blabbing except to say that I think that fusion or that can it all dynamic is very much alive across the political spectrum. And I'm sure
Well,
in a variety of congregational systems.
and it feels to me like that is influenced by the level of the echo chamber that people are subscribing to. And it's one of the things that I worry about for the country, for the left, for the right, for our congregations, whatever. Is like, how do we? I was reading an interesting article today, actually, about whether it's good to fight the things that you think are tearing down democracy or trying to actually strengthen democracy. Like, those are two choices of the same coin, so to speak. Whether you want to choose to fight it or whether you want to choose to strengthen it. And this person was arguing to strengthen democracy is a better way to do that. And so I was thinking about that as it relates to sort of this thought about echo chambers. Do you want to continue to say the things that will, especially from our positions, do you want to say the things that will help people feel good about just feeling good in the difficult times? Or do you want to break through a little bit? And this is a systems question. So in order for the system to sort of right itself, how much out of the system do you have to be? You see what I'm saying, Jake? It's like you have a puzzled look on your face, so I'm wondering. But
How much out of the echo chamber, you mean? Or what?
yes,
Okay.
yes, how much out of the echo chamber? Because you can't right the system, so to speak, if you're just parroting the things that are causing the system not to work.
I don't know how this country survives with two parallel, bitterly divided systems of thought, meaning making, and strategy that are in competition with each other. unless somebody knows of an island where the losing team can get sent, I think we're still stuck here with each other. And I don't think that that means spoon feeding people who see differently, the enemy. I don't think it means barking at them and wagging my finger at them. A systems view, the model of change with differentiation of self is that if I can be defined and connected, if I can be myself and hold steady to my principles and my commitments while breathing the same air in the room, in contact with the other, that without me effortfully trying to change or convert them, but just me saying, I don't see it that way. The party line for the Bowen theory is that over time produces change. And then there's part of me that says, well, I don't know, maybe not, because there's another change model is, the Civil Rights Act, 1965. Don't do a bunch of like dialogue with white people in Mississippi and Tennessee, like impose federal law and standards for, for equal justice under the law. So to the extent that Bowen theory promotes resolving things through relationships, I don't entirely buy it. I don't even know if that's what it says.
Well, like Bowen theory isn't a community organizing strategy as such, like a broad-based civic organizing strategy. And
Yeah.
there's room in in our culture for the encounter that changes a person, and then how that person encounters others and changes others. And there's room for that differentiated leader who, through the modeling of their differentiation, models that for others, and for an honest to God, um, cut the issue community organizing strategy about who your base is and not wasting your time on people that are out of your base. Those
Yeah.
two things have different functions, and they're both absolutely necessary, perhaps now as much as they were in the civil rights era. But how do we do like these strategic community organizing, even activist endeavors,
Yeah.
without losing our capacity for self-differentiation as leaders, without being so entirely consumed by the fiery passion of our righteousness, um, that we lose ourselves?
Yeah. I've thought about how does thoughtfulness work against solidarity? Does dialogue work against an effective block? Or how to uphold both commitments? And I don't know. What do you think, Nancy?
God, on one level, first of all, I think you just blew my mind a little. And I'm sitting here writing down, does thoughtfulness work against solidarity? And the sentence, honest to God, makes me want to cry. Because I don't know the answer. And that if that, if we're having this Socratic dialogue about whether that sentence is true, if that is true, if thoughtfulness works against solidarity, that is terrifying to me. And I don't know. I can't state equivocally if that's true or not. Because I want to be both a thoughtful and self-differentiated leader, and I want to be in solidarity um, with those acutely and existentially oppressed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I need to practice saying her name 100 times in the mirror. Uh, I think it is Zeynep Tufekci, who is a sociologist at the University of North Carolina and a columnist for the New York Times. And she has studied popular movements, and specifically, I forget what her book was a few years ago, but she said she distinguished between the civil rights era and the sort of the Arab Spring cell phone era of mobilization. And she said there is a deficit specifically to relationships in the modern, that technology has eroded what was formed in those church basements and all of that pre-cell phone technology of, like, to make the March on Washington happen, or to, the children's whatever in Birmingham, took lots of conversation, so that solidarity was forged through, I would say, mindful cohesion, different from show up at this place with people you haven't met or talked with, that you're not in sustainable community with. So Tuf Sheki, I got to learn her name because she's great. She would say there is less durability, there's less accountability, there's less community in popular movements now. They can get mobilized faster, but that quickness comes at a cost. And so I guess that's some of what I'm thinking, listening about that. I don't think people moving together, in fact, I think people moving together in coordinated fashion is what the world needs. Uh, and I think that the mindful choice, there's probably some cartoon out there about, it doesn't help the march for me to be saying, well, I have a disagreement with point 3.2, like, we want this now, da 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 da. Like, that's what helps.
Well, those are interesting points because we're recording this the
Yeah.
day after the South Korean, I'm not sure when it will come out, but the day after the South Korean president said martial law. And because of the technology, people were able to show up, leave their dinners, get out of their houses, and go down to the Parliament building to make sure that the parliamentarians could get in there and vote against the martial law.
Wow.
However, the long term, as you have said, the long term sustainability of that kind of movement has got to be based in relationship. Or I would imagine, I mean, you can say it's got to be, but it's probably based in relationship. And we're in a time, I want to bring it back just a little bit to our congregations, right? So we're in a time where our congregational life could be subsumed by the issues that people are struggling with, that people are feeling right now. But if we're not working strongly on relationship and on connection, I fear that we will become just the response team,
Mhm.
and not have that ability to thoughtfully sustain ourselves in solidarity with each other.
I see it as both and so I worked with my colleague Barbara Lehman a few years ago, translating a systems-based family assessment into a systems-based congregational assessment. And one of the dimensions that they used for family assessment was goal direction. When I talked to clergy, people were like, yeah, I mean, we're thriving, but we don't really have a strategic plan. It's, yada, da, 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 da. Anyway, I think there's different language in congregations for that sort of shared forward momentum toward, call it vision, call it whatever. But I almost think about it as like riding a bicycle, that if I'm pedaling, I have a better chance of staying upright on the bicycle than if I coast and it slows down. And I think congregations without a mission and forward momentum, that's where conflict comes up, because they're bored and they are stimulating off each other instead of using that juice to pursue the horizon. But likewise, if they're only the response team, to your point, they're burning out. They're not coordinating. They're not sort of working as that flock or ant colony, or honeybee, that honeybee democracy of, where the waggle dances are highly in conversation with each other. When congregations aren't in conversation with each other, yeah, it gets dumb.
And
I,
like, this is why
I would like to,
everybody loves a barn raising, the people united in common endeavor, whatever that endeavor might be. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's our work in congregational life somehow to sustain and support the individual spiritual transformation and to find a barn to raise. And then
Yeah.
once that barn's done built, find another barn to build.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. I want to teach my congregation the waggle dance, actually, is the bee waggle dance. That's
Well, I'm trying to figure out whether to get started on this. I mean,
yeah.
so
I'll tell you what, we're
yeah.
getting close to our time here.
Oh crap.
And I think we usually try and keep these at around 30 minutes.
Oh
And I
God.
think
Okay, we're done.
yeah, we're pretty close to that. So it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we can't have you back, Jake. Um,
And the
but
whole topic is the next time the whole topic is the bee waggle dance. That's
bee
it. That's
waggle
I
dance.
just want somewhere to
Yeah.
just, yeah. Thank you.
But let's do this. Why don't we take just a couple of minutes if you could kind of just wrap it up for us for this part. Um, maybe if you could give us your short, I know this is an unfair question, but maybe give us a short answer on um, how congregations, how we as human beings at the moment can navigate what we're dealing with together. Is that something you feel comfortable enlightening us
Well,
on?
I'm glad you asked, David, because I have the answer. I alone solve it.
I didn't say give us the answer. I said give us your thoughts on that.
Oh, okay. Well, I got a lot of thoughts. Well, so when I'm working with people in my role as therapist, one of the things, so we do this whole family diagram, multi-generational. One of my encouragements is there's not only problems back there, there's not only deficits, there's also resources. You inherit a legacy of strategies and resilience, to use Nancy's term earlier. So I think a congregation that knows its history and how it got through the hard times, and that leaders who know how their families got through the hard times, are equipped with mental models and strategies to meet today. I think that individuals who are differentiated, by which I mean who take a stand, stay in touch, and keep their cool. Take a stand. Here's what I see. Here's what I will do. What I won't do. Here's my role. That's not my job. Take a stand. Stay in touch. What are you thinking? What's important to you? Hey, where do you see your gifts playing in here? And keep your cool. Manage anxiety. Regulate. Those leaders are gold wherever they're happening. That's not about expertise, pedigree, generation. Those are the elders, those people who can think clearly and stay connected in relationship and not fly off the handle. So I think looking and gathering with those people and figuring out what is the barn to build. The barn to build, I mean, here in Oak Ridge, during the height of Black Lives Matter, what accountability meant from me was showing up at a lot of school board meetings. That wasn't dramatic, but that was what was being asked of me, to go to those boring school board meetings. That was the barn to build in that moment. So it may not look like people want it to look, but there may be a local barn, or there may be, a national mission to hook onto. And that itself, having that direction and that mission, I think will give something people can be proud looking back at themselves in this time. Where were they? Who were they? I don't know.
Well,
Those are thoughts.
that wasn't the answer, but it was a good answer. It was a good
Mhm.
Okay.
answer. Nancy, any closing words from you?
No, except I think that personal transformation and social transformation are linked always. And the old chestnut of a debate, like, well, our congregation is too much about spirituality and our congregation is too much about social justice. And that's a version of trying to unlink personal transformation and social transformation. And we know as pastors and as leaders that they are bound together in deeply complex and sometimes exhausting and profoundly confusing ways. But they can't be pulled apart and made into a dichotomy. And I'm grateful for that impossible task of serving in that interconnection.
Well, thank you both for your incredible wisdom, good-natured approach to these things. Nancy may come back as our guest host again over the next period of time, because Reverend Abi will be on sabbatical still for a couple of months. But Reverend Jake, thank you so much for your insight and incredible wisdom. And we will look forward to whatever comes next for us and for the Holding Space vlog. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.